This is Edge of the Box, a podcast brought to you by WhoScored.com.
Hello and welcome to Edge of the Box, a podcast for WhoScored.com. I'm Dan Bardell, joined by top football journalist Jonathan Wilson and WhoScored's very own Stato. It's Martin Laurence. Some really good games coming up this weekend. There's plenty to talk about, but let's start with the form guide. And Martin, it's quite an interesting form guide, isn't it? There's a few players in there that have snuck in recent weeks. Actually, I'm quite surprised about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it is. I think, like, obviously you'll probably go through the top 10, but yeah, certainly in the middle order of that ranking, there's definitely 3 or 4 players that are interesting names for sure, that have really come to the fore in recent weeks.
Yeah, I'll go through it now. So we've got no surprises. Gundogan and Sterling at 1 and 2. Bruno Fernandes 3. Phil Foden 4. Emi Martinez 5. Bernardo Silva is 6. Kovacic, I think, is a new entry into the top 10 in 7. Cancelo's 8th. Souček 9th. And Neto, I think, wasn't in the top 10 last week. He snuck in there as well. And Jonathan, I haven't had a Chelsea player in the top 10 for a while, I don't think. Perhaps Mount's been flitting around there in the middle of the season, but yeah, Kovacic has come in at 7th. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact he's a really good player is not a surprise. I think the problem for him all the time at Chelsea has been how he fitted in that midfield, and I think one of the big issues that Mr. Sarri had was that, his midfield 3 was Jorginho, Kante, and Kovacic, and none of them are going to score goals. So you probably want one of your midfield 3 to contribute 6, 8 goals, 10 goals even a season. And those are players who basically have scored a dozen goals over their careers. Jorginho, I guess, if you have to take the penalties out. And I think that was one of the reasons that Chelsea under Sarri always seemed so flat and so sterile, was they didn't have those players breaking beyond the centre forward, beyond the forward line. They weren't getting goals from deep, and so I think they did become quite static and quite predictable. But Kovacic, at what he does, which is to circulate the ball, to tactically very intelligent, I think he is really, really good. He just has to have the right players there. And this structure that Tuchel's brought, the 3-4-2-1, which for whatever reason appears to be a formation that really suits Chelsea and has done since Antonio Conte's time, I think that's really working for him, because he has the 2 creators immediately ahead of him. He then has the centre forward ahead of that, and he has the wing backs going on outside him. So often he'll have 5 players, maybe even 6, with an extra midfielder going beyond him, or even one of the wide centre backs going beyond him. And that means his range of passing, his ability to manipulate space and manipulate the ball, it's getting the best out of those assets that he has.
Yeah, I've got to say, I really like that system. And as you say, it's been a system that has served Chelsea well over the years. Martin, we'll come to you to discuss the man in 5th, the only goalkeeper in the top 10, which I'm guessing we can say now that Emi Martinez is the best goalkeeper in the Premier League.
Yeah, well, I think it's hard to argue with that now. This season, I should say. Obviously, he needs to build up a sort of larger sort of volume of games to establish himself as in being in the running for the best keeper in the league. I think a lot of people would say Ederson, of course, and that's fair enough. He's kept loads of clean sheets, but he's, as I touched on last week, he's had very, very little to do a lot of the time. What he has done, he's done well. But I think we just saw Martinez against Brighton, and it's probably the 3rd or 4th time this season where he's kept a clean sheet, but not only kept a clean sheet, he's made about 4 or 5 really strong saves in the game. I think he made 9 saves in the game in total.
Yeah, 9 overall.
Yeah, so obviously he was really busy and literally earned Villa a point, because Villa were terrible, and that's what we have now. There have been games where Villa haven't played particularly well, but Emi Martinez has been the difference, and obviously the difference has usually been Jack Grealish. But to have a player at the other end able to make that difference and able to win you points has really sort of elevated Villa to another level. I've been incredibly impressed by him. I will admit, like, when we signed him, a lot of fans were really, really excited, and I was happy with the signing, but I wasn't getting carried away, just because it was about £20 million, which looks like an absolute steal now. But at the time, he'd only played 10 Premier League games in the space of however many years, and he'd played well. Hadn't made any mistakes, but my concern was that when he did make a mistake, which a goalkeeper will inevitably do, how does he react to that? And I think we've seen, obviously, he had a relatively poor game against West Ham where one of the goals was his fault. One of them he probably could have done better with. But he's already bounced back from that and put in a solid display. So there's where Villa fans wouldn't have known much about his sort of mentality. We've sort of seen that in the last sort of couple of games. And yeah, to have kept 12 clean sheets, he's on course to break Villa's record for the most clean sheets in a season. In your first season at a club is mightily impressive. And in your first season at a club where the defence last season, up until lockdown, obviously was pretty abysmal, it's just, incredible, really. A point on Kovacic I just wanted to say, I thought he was an interesting player because last season he won Chelsea's Player of the Year. So to have done that and then sort of been in and out of the team, it was a weird situation because obviously they signed Havertz and then that meant Mount had dropped back into the sort of deeper position and did that very well. But that basically relegated Kovacic from the team. But he was excellent for most of last season. And just, I think that it's the drive that he provides from midfield that I really love. He's always been an excellent ball carrier. And they don't really have that. Apart from him in the team, they don't really have dribblers. And he's a very, very good one. So, yeah, I think he's been superb. And Tuchel's sort of comments about him, his quotes have been really interesting and really nice. I think, like saying that you could call him up at 3:00 in the morning and he'll be ready at 3:15 to run through walls for him, basically. So he's very much the favourite right now. And I don't see him dropping that spot. And it's Kante who needs to try and force his way in now, isn't it? So it'll be interesting to see whether he can do that because it was sort of alluded to from the get-go that Jorginho was one of the players that Tuchel really liked. So how Kante finds his way into this team will be interesting over the next sort of few weeks.
And Jonathan, just quickly from you and Emi Martinez, let's say you're putting together a team like we do quite often in this podcast. If you're having to choose between Leno and Martinez, who are you choosing?
At the moment, Martinez, without question. I don't know. I mean, we sort of touched on this last week, didn't we? That kind of if you were Arsenal now, you'd be thinking, I wonder if we got rid of the right one. Assuming they had to get rid of one of them to raise a bit of funds. But I mean, Leno's not a bad keeper. It's I don't know if stylistically would Martinez fit with what Arteta wants to do. How good is he with his feet? So Martinez has had a great season. He's really benefited from the move. He's clearly hugely important to Villa. And I'm more than happy to accept that if I'm picking a team based on performances over the last 6 weeks, he will be my starting keeper.
Excellent stuff. And this is a neutral podcast, despite Martin's use of the word we. We don't favour any teams on the Edge of the Box podcast. So just to let you know, and with that in mind, we're actually going to go to the Just a Minute section now because we do like to preview every single Premier League game in this podcast. I'm not sure why this is at this point in the show, to be honest. Martin, how come we've made the change, just to let the listeners know?
Well, we've obviously got the Friday night game, which is the main thing. Okay. So obviously leaving that to the end would be a bit odd. And then we're not covering, spoiler alert, we're not covering Saints Chelsea in full detail, which is the first game on Saturday as well. So it just made sense to do it this way around this week, I think.
Okay, not nicely justified. I didn't need to do that, but I just felt like asking myself as I didn't really know. Jonathan, we'll start with you, even though it's not the first game. We'll start with you with Wolves against Leeds because you always get given a game extra than Martin. So we'll come to you.
Yeah, I've got to work extra for me, Cash. I mean, how appropriate is it in the very week that Sunderland get back to Wembley that we have a repeat of the other FA Cup semi-final from 1973, Wolves v Leeds. Leeds obviously won that one before losing the final. Wolves won the game when they met earlier in the season, 1-0 at Ellen Road. And I suspect that game will be a concern for Leeds in that was the start of us seeing this problem Leeds seem to have with teams who sit deep against them. That's how Wolves have always played, I think, increasingly this season as the season's gone on, as Wolves have lost so many players. They have sat deeper and deeper. So that, I think, could be a problem for Leeds. Wolves, having been in dreadful form, suddenly they're unbeaten in 3. I don't think they've been particularly convincing in any of those. Like they had a very good second half against Southampton. But there is a suggestion that since the arrival of Willian Jose, things are improving for them. For Leeds, the biggest issue is the injury to Calvin Phillips. and also Mattis Klick, but particularly Phillips. I think his absence at the weekend was a real key for them. So Wolves sitting deep against a possibly injury-hit Leeds.
Very good. And as I say, despite talking about Sunderland there, we are a neutral podcast. Martin, Southampton.
You provoked that. I wasn't going to do that. But
Right. So Saints Chelsea. Southampton's 6-match losing streak is not only the worst in the Premier League, but the worst across Europe's top 5 leagues now. It's the worst such run all season behind Sheffield United with 8 defeats in a row. But with Chelsea followed by trips to Leeds and Everton to come, Saints will need to cause an upset probably to ensure that they don't break that record. Chelsea, by contrast to the form team in the league behind Man City, keeping another clean sheet en route to a comfortable win over Newcastle. It's still the case that no opposition player has scored against the Blues since Thomas Tuchel's arrival, but they have faced 4 of the 6 lowest scorers in the league in the Germans' first 5 matches in charge. The big shock was the inclusion of Kepa in the starting 11 last weekend, though Tuchel insisted Edouard Mendy remains the number 1. So it'll be interesting to see who starts in the goal. Thiago Silva and Tammy Abraham are out for the visitors, while Saints were dealt a real blow after Kyle Walker-Peters suffered a recurrence of a hamstring injury and will miss out.
Yeah, certainly didn't think I'd be seeing Kepa in goal for Chelsea again, but a clean sheet, and maybe that'll do something for his confidence. Jonathan, one for the football purists, it's Sean Dyche against Big Sam, Burnley v West Brom.
Well, I think we saw with West Brom on Sunday that there perhaps is a solidity beginning to emerge there. And the thing that Allardyce was talking about a lot afterwards was that he finally has time to, the 5 players he brought in January, finally there's been a bit of time to gel them. If you look at West Brom's schedule now, they have 1 game a week all the way through till I think it's the 8th of May is the first time when they have 2 in a week. So there is time to fit them together. And I think you saw how there's 3 of the signings really played well against United. Obviously, Diagne got the goal, but also Maitland-Niles and Ukoslu at the back of midfield, I think, made a big difference. Ukoslu especially. But, they've won 1 of the last 14 games, they're 12 points adrift. And the real fear for them, I think, is that although you get a sense Newcastle might be in range, you think if they catch them, well, Fulham are also going to catch them. So it may be too late. Burnley, 2 points above Newcastle, 11 points in the last 7 games, but they've only lost 2 of those, which were to City and Chelsea. So their form has improved. But you sort of feel this is key for West Brom, that they have to win this if they are to have a chance of staying up.
Martin, a staple of the WhoScored podcast, Fulham against Sheffield United.
You get the sense that if it isn't already over for Sheffield United, anything but a win here would ultimately be the end of their survival hopes. Fulham, by contrast, have renewed hope, but will probably see the draw in Burnley in midweek as an opportunity missed to make that game in hand over Newcastle count. That said, over the past 10 weeks, only the current top 4 have lost fewer matches than Fulham. But turning draws into wins in games like this is absolutely pivotal to their hopes of bridging the gap. Fulham have drawn 9 of their last 13 league matches, but may be able to take some hope from the fact that no team has drawn fewer matches than Sheffield United's 2. Fulham have Tom Kearney and Alexander Mitrovic out, who incidentally were the goal scorers the last time these teams met at Craven Cottage. The club's 2 most important players in the Championship have once again failed to carry that form into the Premier League. John Egan is now out for the Blades along with John Fleck, so Phil Jagielka and Ben Osborne will act as cover.
And the final one, Jonathan, it's you. It's Brighton v Palace. Is it a derby? I'm not sure, but I'll let you delve into the game.
Well, yeah, the issue whether it's a derby is, I guess, a semantic one. Do you have to be in the same city or in the same region? But, there is a big rivalry there. So, it is a game with extra tension. Maybe that doesn't matter as much without fans. 1-1 when they met earlier in the season. Brighton now are 8 points clear of the relegation zone, so you feel they're almost safe. And they would go above Crystal Palace on goal difference were they to win this. They've been playing very, very well the last 2 or 3 months. They've only had 3 defeats in the last 15 in all competitions. The last 6 games in the league, there's been 3 wins and 3 draws. The big problem they got is scoring goals. They've only scored 4 goals in the last 7 games. Webster's a doubt for them at the back, and Tarek Lamptey is still out. Palace, you start to fear for. They could potentially get sucked into a relegation battle. They've lost 4 of the last 6. I don't think particularly convincing in the 2 that they won either. And they've got this ongoing problem with Wilfried Zaha. And, as we said last week, they won 46% of games with him this season. They've now taken 1 point, 1 draw and 6 defeats from the 7 without.
Yeah, a bit annoying in that game. The 2 most fun players in Lamptey and Zaha won't play, so that's quite annoying in my opinion.
And it would have been good to see them directly up against each other as well.
Yeah, that would have been a great battle, to be fair. So it's a shame that neither of them will be taking the pitch. Right, let's go into detail. Let's start with probably the biggest game of the weekend. It's the Merseyside derby, Liverpool against Everton at Anfield. And Martin, I don't know about you. I'm feeling a little bit sorry for Klopp at the moment. I know some people aren't liking some of his behaviour towards journalists and stuff like that, but they're obviously having a bit of a rough time. Are you feeling a little bit sorry for him?
Yeah, I think the main thing you have to take into consideration is obviously the sort of issues off the pitch. Obviously, his mother died recently, so that's always going to affect you from a personal perspective in terms of his behaviour being a bit spiky. So, yeah, and obviously the issues on the pitch with injuries, they are pretty incredible. Just in terms of every single centre back just getting injured and then coming back and then getting injured again. He must feel that this is madness right now. So yeah, I sympathise with him in that sense. Whether he could have done things differently, whether obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, whether he should have been playing centre backs at centre back, regardless of sort of their sort of experience, is a question, but I don't think it's one that we are able to answer really. I don't blame him for playing the likes of Henderson at the back, and we talked about it a lot. That's just exposed them in the middle of the pitch. But I think the one thing that I wanted to touch on, because obviously we've been sort of quite negative about Liverpool, and it's been hard not to be, is the fact that these injuries, the fact that the midfielders are moving back, that has sort of allowed for Curtis Jones's emergence this season, which I think is a real positive for Liverpool. I think he's been really, really bright, especially in the Champions League. I think he's been excellent. I think that sort of the European game arguably suits his game better. He's another one of these sort of young English technical talents, really, really confident, keeps the ball really, really well. So I think his performance in midweek was really, really good again. So if there is sort of one sort of silver lining to a pretty massive cloud, it's that Curtis Jones has been able to get some game time, and that will develop his game a great deal, I assume.
Do you think, Jonathan, that Curtis Jones has got a shout of getting in the England squad for the summer?
I suppose he has. I don't know, I'm slightly overwhelmed by the number of options England have. That I don't know. I don't know if it's a sign of a lack of sort of great senior players, although that seems harsh on people like Harry Kane and Jordan Henderson, or whether this is the sort of great vindication of the EPPP shift of, what was that, 14 years ago that was brought in, that there are suddenly this sort of enormous crop of incredibly talented young players. But yeah, I think he's a player who, had he been around sort of 10, 15 years ago, we'd have been talking about him almost as a shoo-in for the England squad. And now it's, he's got a real battle. He's another one of these really, really good, technically gifted, creative midfielders. And when he has played, he's been excellent.
Yeah, I'm almost uncomfortable with the amount of players that England have got to choose from. Give me some more plodders. I don't like all these technical footballers coming through. It's not what I'm used to at all going into the summer. And Martin, there's been a couple of occasions now where you've thought Liverpool might be back. Obviously, they went to West Ham and hit 3, I think, in that game, and you thought, right, they're back now. Salah's back on the score sheet. And to be fair, Salah is back on the score sheet. But could the Champions League winning midweek, could that be a turning point? Because that's a cracking result against Leipzig.
Yeah, it was excellent. And they started the game in particular really, really well. So yeah, they'll definitely take confidence from it. And I think Ozan Kabak in particular will probably take more confidence than anyone else. Maybe it suited him playing a German side, but it hasn't suited him playing a German side for the last 2 years or so. But yeah, what he's very good at is sort of in the air. He's a very strong, big guy. So he's probably a pretty useful player to have when you're coming up against Dominic Calvert-Lewin this weekend. So how he handles him, because you'd worry if it was maybe Henderson and to a lesser extent Fabinho. I don't know if I think Fabinho's only a doubt, so maybe he will be back available. So that'll be interesting as well. But I think Kabak keeps his place now after his display in midweek, and I thought he was actually okay. He did pretty well, pretty quiet in his game against Leicester up until that sort of mad sort of few minutes. And I personally, that instance, I personally felt that was probably Alisson's fault more than Kabak. Kabak could have done better, but I thought it was a bit harsh that he was sort of faced criticism for that. A misunderstanding, obviously, but probably lost the flight of the ball. But Alisson steaming out was just didn't help him on his league debut. So a big game for him. And yeah, I think the fact that Mane and Salah were both on the score sheet in midweek will sort of help them. We haven't really had that where we've had. It used to be every week Mane, Salah, and Firmino were all scoring, and we haven't had that for quite a while now. So having sort of two of them at once on the score sheet is actually quite a big thing. They've been sort of reliant on Salah. Mane struggled in front of goal, so that could be a boost as well. But Everton, one of these teams that are so hard to predict. Generally, I'd say probably better against stronger opposition. So an interesting game for sure.
I've got to say, I completely agree with you on the Alisson stuff. If you're not having a good time as a goalkeeper, stay in your line. Don't come out and wipe your centre half out. That's an absolute catastrophic thing to do.
It's also there was clearly no shout. I mean, the fact we don't have fans there, we can now hear quite clearly there was no shout. And you can say, well, maybe it's some sort of freakish thing that the microphones didn't quite pick it up. But Kabak, there was no reaction at all. So he clearly didn't hear anything. So that I think is Alisson's fault. My one concern with Kabak is I'm not sure how quick he is. That I think you can turn him, and that's when positioning and the organisation of the press becomes hugely important. And that is something that Liverpool have struggled with this season. And of course, if you're not great on the turn, playing against Jamie Vardy in your debut is pretty much as bad as it gets. So, I totally take the point that Calvert-Lewin looks a forward whose skill set he's more suitable to combat than Vardy.
Right, Jonathan, we'll come to you on Everton. I mean, the fixtures last night, I really wanted to watch the Champions League, but the podcast comes first. So I did watch Everton, Man City. Instead, did you tune in for the Champions League or did you watch Everton?
I was working on the Champions League, but to be honest, I was on such an adrenaline high after Sunderland's glorious penalty shootout victory over Lincoln in the Papa John's semi that it's hard to take it in.
A trophy being sponsored by Papa John's. It's just not right. So you didn't watch Everton last night, but they gave Man City a run for their money for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the highlights and losing to City, most teams do at the minute. I mean, I just find Everton incredibly difficult to understand. I mean, Ancelotti, after the defeat to Fulham, was talking about how they find it easier when they can defend, sit deep, and play on the break. And I think that's a fairly natural thing. I think they're far from the only side who find that. But actually, when you sort of talk to Everton fans, particularly, there is a sense that they have that the team struggles to get up for games against the likes of Fulham, the likes of Newcastle. Now, that's obviously not going to be a problem against Liverpool, but it is a problem for Everton if they do want to sort of try and get into the Champions League. You can't be chucking away, you can't be losing games at home to Newcastle and Fulham and hoping to finish fourth. I mean, the thing I also think about Everton is that Hammers is such a weird player for them that if you look at their win percentage with him, it's 44%, without it's 64%. And I do wonder whether, for all that he's a lovely player to watch, for all his creativity, whether he does cause defensive problems for them. And again, obviously, the tendency to give Hammers his head will be much greater against teams lower in the table and against the likes of Manchester City or Liverpool.
Jonathan, I think this week you're gonna pick what your ideal 11 would be from the available players, and then we're going to compare it to the WhoScored 11. Hopefully you did know that was happening.
I didn't, but I can do that.
Okay. It's good. I mean, picking a goalkeeper is literally like asking me if I want to be sick or have diarrhea. I'm not sure at the moment on form which goalkeeper you'd pick, but I'll leave that to you.
Well, I mean, I've gone for Alisson just because history suggests he is a very, very good goalkeeper, even if he is having a wobbly spell at the minute. I mean, Pickford, I think, is still an injury doubt. We're not quite.
He played last night.
Right. Okay. So Pickford would be available, but yeah, and I actually think Pickford was having an all right season, and then sort of in the game against Leicester, he got a lot of criticism for that, the goal he conceded there. But that, I think he was unsighted. I feel a bit. I think he did well to get a hand to that because his weight was all going the other way. So I don't think that was. I think if there'd been another keeper where we weren't sort of. Where we didn't have the attitude of expecting mistakes, I'm not sure that would have been criticised to the same extent. Then I think you've got to still go Alexander-Arnold and Robertson at fullback. Despite Dean is obviously a really good player and has been very important from an attacking point of view for Everton this season. And Seamus Coleman, I think, has had a new lease of life at what is 32? Is he now? He's one of those players who I had an idea he was coming right to the end of his career, and then was slightly surprised to see he was 32 when he started playing well early in the season. The centre backs are an issue because there's so many injuries. Amino, I think, is a doubt for the weekend. Is that right?
Yeah, he was probably out. He went off.
So, given I'm very reluctant to pick Fabinho or Henderson at centre back, I guess I go Keane and Godfrey, but I feel a bit uncomfortable with that. Midfield is very solid and sort of a bit stodgy of Fabinho, Doucouré and Henderson, and then Salah, Mane and Calvert-Lewin as my front three.
I think you've got 4, if my math is correct, of what's actually gone into the WhoScored 11. So I think 4 out of 11 there, literally.
But there's always going to be a problem with Liverpool that I'm picking midfielders in midfield, and their stats are going to be them playing a centre back. So there's that.
Yeah, it's a quirk of the podcast. I mean, the goalkeeper and the back 4 are completely different, I think, from what you picked again. I know you picked Michael Keane, didn't you? So but everyone else different. So we've got the WhoScored 11 is a 4-2-3-1. I believe, looking at that, Martin. So we've got Jordan Pickford in goal, who I've got to say, I thought he should have saved Bernardo Silva's last night, but I don't want to pick on him. Holgate's at right back with Digne at left back, Henderson and Keane centre backs, Thiago and Jones as a midfield too. Salah, James and Mane are then operating behind Calvert-Lewin, who didn't play the last 2 games for Everton. I'm not sure if he's back for the weekend. I guess we'll find out in the press conferences, but a nice little side there, but I'm not sure whether it's better than yours, Jonathan.
No, not in terms of tactical shape. Thiago and Jones is obviously a very fragile midfield too, but I'm just picking the players based on their ratings this season. So Pickford over Alisson will obviously get a bit of stick, but it is based on ratings this season. And I agree with Jonathan that Pickford was actually having a decent season. But basically, we knew he was having a slightly decent season because it was quite low key compared to usual since obviously the reverse fixture when he ended Van Dijk's season. So Pickford gets in ahead of Alisson mainly because of Alisson's wobble of late. Holgate, I really like Holgate. I'm not really sure. I think he's a centre back rather than a right back, but he has been playing right back primarily this season. But I think he's a big talent. So then him and Godfrey's a sort of real bright future, I think, for Everton at the back. So he's the right back, Digne the left back, and the other interesting one is someone alluded to by Jonathan in James Rodriguez, who will always get strong ratings because when he does play, he generally plays against weaker teams because Ancelotti seemingly doesn't trust him, and I think that's an issue that he's had with managers throughout his career. That he's a sort of anomaly in that he generally plays pretty well when he plays, but again mainly against weaker teams. But he's just not trusted to do the defensive work, and that's why he didn't make the team at Real Madrid, didn't make the team at Bayern, and he's now surprisingly, I guess, not making the team at Everton. So a really bizarre circumstance of a player who's clearly so gifted and can't get in the team at Everton. It's such a bizarre case because he started the season so well, obviously.
I mean, Ancelotti, if anyone knew what they were getting with James, you'd think it would be him. You think he might have considered that. He's a surprise to see him not in the 11 because he's such a good player. And again, it comes down to fun. In my eyes, he makes Everton a little bit more fun to watch. West Ham v Tottenham is the next big game that we're going to preview in depth. And Jonathan, the first question is for you. If you had to watch Moyes' West Ham or Mourinho's Tottenham from now until the end of the season, you could watch nobody else. Who would you choose?
Am I writing about it?
You can do. Yeah, you can do.
Look,
why not?
Slagging off Mourinho is much easier than slagging off Moyes, so I'll watch Tottenham. I mean, you can't really slag off Moyes when he's won 6 of his last 8. I mean,
no,
I don't quite understand what's happened there this season. Because he just looked so shot when he left United. I mean, he was terrible at Sunderland. I know Sunderland had a lot of other issues, but I think it's too easy just to say Sunderland was a basket case. A lot of managers went close to taking them down. Moyes did. And the thing that I think, you often get this, that people on the outside sort of, they say, oh, well, look, the debt was this, and you have this ridiculous turnover of players, and there's clearly kind of cultural issues within the dressing room, shall we say. There's sort of a club so used to not winning games in August and September and having these great escapes, which is clearly financially a terrible way of doing it, because you end up buying players on huge wages every January, then trying to offload them in the summer, and then unbalancing the squad and having to go through the same cycle again. All of that is true. But the thing that Sunderland fans, I think, can't forgive, or that's a terribly strong phrase, the thing that really frustrates them is that the game that Sunderland stayed up the previous season, so 2015-16, the game that sealed survival was a 3-0 home win over Everton in the final week of the season, midweek game that had been postponed from earlier in the season. Win it 3-0, they play really, really well. And the sense was this was Sunderland in as good a position as they'd been since the height of the Peter Reid era. And that Allardyce was he had a plan. The players he brought in, it all worked. You could see what a future might look like that might be sort of mid-table or maybe even slightly above that. And then Moyes comes in. I think the first home game was a defeat to Middlesbrough. Second home game is against Everton. So it's a team that 3 months earlier, they've absolutely hammered 3-0. And Moyes before the game is, it's going to be tough for you. We can get a point, that'll be great. And Lukaku scores a hat-trick, Sunderland lose 3-0. And you sort of think, well, in 3 months, this 6-goal swing, and not only a 6-goal swing, but an expectation of a 6-goal swing from your manager. That, I think, is what the frustration stems from, that this sort of the mood of optimism was punctured immediately by Allardyce leaving to take the England job. And Moyes has sort of accepted the downward spiral. Now, clearly at West Ham, he's come in and done a great job. I think the question, we'll see this as the season goes on. I think a question even towards the end at Everton was whether his methods of conditioning were at the cutting edge, or whether Everton in that last sort of 2 or 3 seasons were getting caught out late in games and late in the season. I think certainly at Sunderland lost a lot of points in the last 10 minutes of games that season. West Ham seem not to be suffering that, which maybe he has put it right. Maybe he's kind of got a new conditioning coach. Maybe he's worked out new ways of doing it. But I think as the season goes on, obviously there will be pressure on a squad that's not the deepest. We probably will see a downturn. But, they're playing really well. They've got a lot of confidence. The structure of the side's very good. And you've got to give Moyes credit for the players he's brought in. Souček was very much his signing. That he was a player he wanted. It wasn't scouted for him. He said, this is a player we should get. So all of that, he deserves great credit.
Yeah, and I think whether or not it's sustainable long term, I'm with you. I'd have my reservations. I guess the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see over the next few years. But for this season,
my other question with that was how many of the victories were by a single goal, and that's it's a bit like Sheffield United last season. You always say, well, that's great, but are you? Is it just because you got the confidence? You're getting those goals this season. What's going to happen next season? Are you going to be able to carry that forward? And they'd only had 2 victories by more than a single goal up until about 3 weeks ago, which were the 2 games when Moyes wasn't there, when he was watching at home because he was isolated because of COVID, which is, I'm sure, is coincidence, but it was an odd coincidence. But then, they have beaten Sheffield United and Villa. Are they the 2 games they've won recently by more than 1 goal? So
definitely Villa.
So is that just that confidence builds and it all snowballs, or is that actually something a bit more substantial? And the confidence, of course, Moyes should take credit for that as well. The mood of a squad. We criticised Lampard for sort of draining confidence, so you can't then not give Moyes credit for building confidence.
No, but this season, Martin, even if it's not sustainable, they've got a massive shot at getting the top 6 and qualifying for Europe, which would be a big thing considering where they were last season.
Oh, massive. Incredible turnaround. I just don't think anyone really fancied their squad, but one man who did was David Moyes. And I think that's sort of the point that Jonathan was making, that he signed players that he wanted. He's built a team in his image. It might not be the prettiest image sometimes, but he's built a team that he trusts and that he knows will perform his sort of carry out his orders on the pitch, and they're doing that. And he, like Jonathan says, he deserves great credit for that, because he did that at Everton. He built a team that was solid, organised, and ultimately pushed for Europe. And now that's what West Ham are doing. And nobody would have said that ahead of the season, not one person. And I think he worked on that base first, and the signing of Souček obviously was a massive one, and Sofal as well, who's been excellent. But he has started to add a little bit more excitement to the team in Benrahma and Jesse Lingard. So there is more of a balance there now. They are more of a sort of interesting team to watch than they would have been, certainly towards the end of last season, when they had this sort of mismatch of players who individually looked like good players, like Yarmolenko, Felipe Anderson, but never really fit his system. He deserves credit for drilling that team into the sort of shape that they are now. I think they've got a shot at top six just because they look like one of the teams that aren't wobbling, that aren't having a wobble. And if you can sustain any sort of form in the position that they're in, then they've got a chance. My one concern would be their next run of fixtures is tough, and did they need to sign a striker to replace Haller? Because Mikel Antonio, over the last sort of 6 months, well, all season really, has had his sort of fitness and injury problems, and he's a doubt again for this weekend. So obviously they coped very, very well without him in midweek, but that was against Sheffield United, who've been poor. So it'll be interesting to see how they can sort of break down better teams if they don't have Antonio available.
It's quite on trend, teams only having one striker and not having much backup. A few teams are having a good season. I've noticed pretty much only have one striker. Obviously, you've got Villa with Watkins, who's played every minute so far. Bamford at Leeds, there's not any real backup for him because Rodrigo's been playing in midfield in the main. So there's a few teams who are having good seasons, Jonathan, who don't really have backup strikers.
Yeah, I mean, City have been doing it without a striker for most of the season.
Yeah, true.
So I don't.
Who needs
I
them?
I guess maybe if one player sort of gets in the position, starts scoring goals, maybe it's good for their confidence, good for the rhythm that they can just keep going. But it's obviously an enormous risk if you then do get an injury.
Yeah, I'd quite like to say, I think if Antonio is out, I think Lingard would do a good job through the middle for them. I think he's so busy and lively. I really think he could offer a spark as like a false nine. I know he's not an out-and-out striker, but I really think he could do something for them. So I'm saying they're going to get top six the way it's going. Spurs, I mean, when we started doing this podcast, we were talking about them for the title, and now I'm starting to think a top six might be something that's beyond them. And Martin Kane and Son, if Spurs didn't make the top six, even if Spurs didn't make the Champions League, Kane especially, he said, been quoted in the past that he wants to win medals, he wants to win trophies. Would he be looking at going?
Yeah, he has to. I think him and Son are two of the best forwards in Europe, in the world. So he can't be playing for a team outside of the Europa League. So I think obviously Tottenham will sort of benefit from the fact that not many teams have the money to be able to sort of convince them to sell. And Daniel Levy drives a hard bargain as it is. So it would take monstrous offers to get them off the books. But you'd have to think that one, if not both, and I would assume both, would kick up a fuss if they're not in Europe, would say, look, we need to move on because this isn't good enough. And it's not the case that, it looks like this could just be an off-season and there's sort of hope around the corner, not under Mourinho at least. I don't see their squad beyond Kane and Son as being a top sort of 4 squad now, let alone pushing for a title and silverware. Obviously, they could win the League Cup, and if they do, I don't think that they will. But if they do, Mourinho will milk the hell out of that if they can manage it. And obviously, he'll be pushing for Europa League as well. And he'll say, even if they don't get top 6 and they win the Europa League and get into the Champions League that way, then that's a good season. Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know what the expectations are now. But yeah, it's a tough one to call. I don't think they'll get top 6 this season. So yeah, they've got a better chance of winning the Europa League, I think, possibly.
Yeah, I think they should probably put their eggs in that basket now, shouldn't they, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, 4 defeats in the last 5 in the league, but it's not just that. It's the sense that we know how this works in Mourinho. We're in that sort of doom spiral, and I think the problem they've got is I think the figure to get rid of Mourinho, to sack him now, I've seen 35 million, I've seen 38 million. Now that's obviously an astonishing amount of money, but what does being in the Champions League bring in? It's more than that. And not only that, when you have this new stadium that sort of needs a sort of consecration as a sort of top European stadium, you want Real Madrid, Juventus, Barcelona, Bayern Munich coming to that stadium and, full of fans. That's what that stadium needs to sort of begin to kind of get its value. Being in the Champions League, there's a multiplicatory effect. It's even more important for the club's image. What you don't want is to be playing sort of, teams from sort of Macedonia and Poland and lower ranking Portuguese teams or Danish teams in the Europa League, and I think that's becoming ever more important as negotiations are going on over what the Champions League might look like in the future. And if people are starting to look at clubs having a guaranteed place in the Champions League or a place based on sort of 5 years worth of history, then you don't want to be, you don't want to still be in the water when the ladder's pulled up. You want to be on the ladder. And a couple of years ago, Tottenham were on that ladder. They were getting to the final, and if they sunk back to Europa League level, this is possibly the most damaging time in history for that to happen. Particularly when they've got this £1 billion stadium that needs paying off.
Yeah, with the £1 billion starting to pay off, you'd suggest paying Mourinho 35 million to leave. It isn't going to happen. And Martin, if you want to get rid of me, I'm quite happy to go for 35 million. That's I'll take that for sure. Let's look at the combined 11 now. So we've got Lloris in goal, despite a difficult few weeks for him. We've got Soufal, Dawson, Alderweireld and Reguilon as the back four. Rice and Souček sitting, and Ndombele at 10. And then Antonio, Harry Kane and Son as the front three. Jonathan, would that be similar to what you'd do?
Remarkably similar. I had Fabianski in goal. That's probably recency bias. I'm remembering Lloris's errors. I had Cresswell at left back, but that was a toss of a coin. As ever, I had a slightly more defensive midfield. I went for Højbjerg and Rice sitting with Souček sort of pushing on. And I struggled with the forward line in that I think you have to have Kane and Son. I went for Antonio on the right, but sort of thinking that's not really his position. He needs to play through the middle or down the left. So I sort of, even Lingard's not really somebody who plays down the right, but he would be an option, or I guess Jared Bowen. But essentially, very, very similar to what you had.
Well, Martin, does that please you that it's the same as Jonathan's, or not far off?
It does, yeah. I think like the interesting ones there are Soufal and in particular Craig Dawson. What a signing he's turned out to be. I was going to
mention him before. Incredible signing.
So can I just ask, would Ogbonna have been in had he been fit?
I do not know. Let me check his rating. I think he might have, but maybe not. It's all very tight.
That was the other sort of consideration I had. I mean, obviously not fit, not eligible, but
he would not actually. No, he wouldn't.
Right, okay.
Still behind Alderweireld. But yeah, Dawson's the highest rated of them. And yeah, I think a lot of people sort of not laughed at that signing, but just sort of wrote it off as this sort of dull signing. But I think what you get with Craig Dawson is a very solid, experienced Premier League defender who is excellent from set pieces. And his signing has actually been a bit of a masterstroke in that they now have Craig Dawson and Thomas Souček to mark from set pieces, and Ogbonna's good from set pieces as well. So it's not like, we can sort of double, triple mark Thomas Souček now, because Craig Dawson is exceptional in the air. So they're a massive threat from set pieces now, and Cresswell's delivery is excellent. So that's a big weapon to have, and that's could be the difference for them in that sort of top six pursuit. And that seems like a crazy thing to say, that Craig Dawson could be the difference in the top six pursuit. But yeah, I've always rated him pretty highly as a sort of middling, sort of mid-table Premier League player who's usually played at relegation struggling clubs, personally.
Yeah, I mean, even Diop came in, didn't he, and bagged a goal from a set piece in midweek. Antonio's handy in the air as well. So they really are a handful from set pieces. And as you say, Creswell's delivery is excellent as well. Let's move on to Villa against Leicester at Villa Park Sunday, 2:00. And we'll start with the combined 11 just to mix it up a bit. A questionable formation, I would say here, Martin. I'm not sure I'm going to get this right reading it out, but I'll give it a go. So we've got Martinez in goal, Castagna, Evans, Mings and Target is the back four. One of the most important players in the Premier League at the moment. Ndidi, I'm presuming, is sitting here. Yeah. Then Maddison and Tielemans just in front of him. And Grealish is a 10 behind Vardy and Watkins. Is that right?
Well, yeah, it can be. I'll allow that.
It's flexible.
I had it as a 4-1, sort of 3-2, with that 3 obviously being super attacking with Tielemans, with Grealish and Maddison sort of flanking Tielemans. But I had to find a way to try and get both of them in. And then obviously you could leave out Watkins or Vardy. Their rating is 0.01 difference in starts alone, that is. So two of the sort of possibly more similar strikers in the league, I'd say, in terms of their sort of profile, work rate wise, offering a threat in behind. So both, yeah, I think where Watkins is on the way up, Vardy's arguably on the way down, has relied quite a lot on penalties this season. I know he scored against Liverpool, but it was an open goal from a yard. So I do think we are starting to possibly see the slight decline in Jamie Vardy, but we'll allow him that after what he's done over the last few years. But yeah, really exciting team, and it would have been even better were it not for injuries, we should say as well.
Yeah, a lot of
Justin would have been left back. Fofana would have been in for Evans. And Cash would have just been in ahead of Castagna, but that's a toss-up, I think, this season. Both been very, very good. So, yeah, and I completely agree with you on Ndidi. I think he's arguably the best defensive midfielder in the league. There's a few candidates, I'll accept that, but how solid he's been ever since he's arrived. He's really, really underrated. I'm hugely surprised that there hasn't been a sort of top 4 offer, if not interest, in him. So yeah, I love him. Great player.
I mean, before we come to Jonathan over his 11, where on earth is Ezri Konsa, Martin?
I knew this is a weird one because it's a stats 11, obviously.
Yeah,
and you'll accept that Tyrone Mings is the busier defender of the two, and that's
I love Mings.
Whether you see that as a positive or a negative, whether he's maybe targeted a bit more, but most defenses usually have one who's a bit more proactive and one who's sits off a little bit and uses their head a little bit more, and I think that's Konsa, who's sort of less involved. But yeah, like you won't get me sort of poo-pooing Ezri Konsa, what a player he is, and linked with Liverpool and Tottenham this week. So yeah, one to watch, and he's apparently on the England radar as well, which I think would be justified too.
Yeah, it'd be weird if Villa had 2 centre-halves knocking around the England squad, as they couldn't defend at all last season until the last 10 or so games. Jonathan, what would your 11 be? Have you got any changes that you'd make? Would you play a proper formation?
Well, I of all these combined 11s, I don't think I've found any quite as hard as this one. Like every position, I've sort of got somebody else. So, even in goal, Schmeichel and Martinez is a great option to have. If you're a manager, that's one of those nice problems that managers like to have. And I guess Martinez on form, you maybe go for, but I think I probably would pick Schmeichel purely on longevity, in the sense that he can sustain that. Then at centre back, I haven't got a problem with Evans and Mings at all. But you could equally pick Soyuncu and Konsa, or Fofana as well. So my only, I sort of went for a 4-2-3-1 with Ndidi and Tielemans deep, Maddison playing in front of them. I went for Vardy over Watkins, again, purely on longevity. But the problem is actually on the right. The right side of that attacking three is the only area where you'd say there is a slight weakness. And you end up picking Albrighton, which is fine. He's obviously very consistent. He'll do the work. He'll drop in. He's a very good cross of the ball. But in a side that sort of seems full of star quality, he's the one who feels a little bit ordinary. But I guess you could play Barnes on the wrong side, or you could play that very narrow formation that Martin wants to.
Yeah, the goalkeeper one, I agree with you. That's a really tough one because this is a pretty big shout, I would say. I actually think Kasper Schmeichel will go down as a Premier League great. So it's not quite to the level of his dad, but I honestly think he's that good. He's been such a good keeper for Leicester, and he's obviously won the Premier League as well. So if he's not going down as a great, I don't think he'll be too far off. Will the Europa League affect them a bit, Martin? Because they're getting back now to playing that Thursday, Sunday. Now, is that going to affect Leicester's push for Champions League?
I mean, it could do. But what we saw from the group stages, obviously, when they were able to rotate, and I think that's the interesting point here, whether Leicester do rotate in the Europa League will be really interesting. Obviously, they play Slavia Prague tonight on the sort of day of recording, so we don't know yet. But what they prioritise, and I think we've talked about their squad depth a lot this season, and it's underrated. So I think they can juggle the two, personally. But they do have a lot of injury. If they didn't have injuries, I'd be confident that it probably wouldn't affect them that much. The fact that they do makes it difficult, but they've dealt with it very well to now. If you look back at their group stages, they won 5 out of 6 games directly after their Europa League games. So pretty good. They did lose one, and it was a poor result. I can't remember who it was against, but they did lose once. But yeah, like I said, if they didn't have the injury problems, I'd be confident that it probably wouldn't affect them. So we'll see this weekend because it is a tough game against Villa as well. So we'll see. I think they'll probably rotate against Slavia Prague. Personally, I think they'll play the likes of Luke Thomas, Albrighton maybe as wing backs, Fuchs in defence. So I think they'll do that personally, and I think they'll in that sense they'll go strong against Villa and be okay. It's just whether they can get that result against Slavia Prague, I guess.
Yeah, I think they've left a few players at home, actually, if my memory serves me correctly. Just a quick word on Villa as the only neutral on this podcast, Jonathan. Stumbling a little bit at the moment. They'll win a game, but then they'll lose the next one. And do you think they've been found out a little bit?
I don't know. I mean, it happens that we have this desire to look for patterns, and I sort of thought. I mean, Leicester are a really good example of this last season. That you could look at Leicester's season in two ways. You could say, in terms of points per game, it was much better, or a little bit better than you'd have expected. It was a good season in terms of points per game. They improved their league placing. They got into the Europa League, but because those points were front loaded, it felt like there was a bit of a decline. People was Rodgers lost the dressing room, and that's I think a concern for them again this season that they have that history of a decline. Towards the end of the season, was that a freakish thing, or will that repeat? But it might just be that you're sort of, I don't want to say predetermined, but that you will pick up, say, 1.5 points per game, and it actually doesn't matter if you get them in your first 10 games or your last 10 games. And Sunderland are a classic case of now going the other way, of slow starts for a long, long time, picking up towards the end of the season. Oh yeah, everything's suddenly all right under Poyet, Advocaat, Allardyce, whoever. Then the next season begins and we're back to where we were again. So I'm always uneasy about these narratives of, yes, they've been found out. Yes, the squad's not quite deep enough. That may be true, or it may just be that Villa this season were always going to pick up roughly, 1 point, whatever points per game, and it just happens they've gotten in the early part of the season. I think 3 goals in the last 4 games is the worry, that the goals do seem to have dried up a bit, and that would be the concern. But whether that's just sort of regression to the mean or whether it is actually a trend, I think is much harder to say.
Very interesting to hear that from you, Jonathan. And time now for Arsenal against Man City. And Jonathan, again, I'm going to come to you because I think we would do a combined 11, but I think we can all agree it'd be pretty futile. But is there any Arsenal players, if you were picking a best team, is there any Arsenal players that would get in the team?
No.
No.
I really tried with this. It's just not. I mean,
not even one. I think I've made one.
Saka would be the one who you'd think has been the best Arsenal player this season. But you can't honestly say he's better than Sterling or Foden. So there's no place for him. He gets on the bench, which not many other Arsenal players do. But no, I don't know. I mean, who was the one you managed to squeeze in?
I'd just have Tierney at left back.
Well, he's injured,
to be honest.
You can't pick him.
I wasn't sure of the rules. It's never clear. It's never clear, the rules. Could I have Tierney, Martin?
Pretty clear. I think he's actually might be a doubt. I think he might be coming back to fitness.
I heard a rumour he's fit again, so I put him in.
If he's fit, then I think, obviously there's a case to be made there. But
you
even
don't
then,
play him from the start. He's coming back from a long injury. Exactly. You can't play him from the start in a game of this magnitude.
Yeah, again, even then, he wouldn't make the WhoScored team because it would be Walker right back and Cancelo left back, which I think is fair. So, the WhoScored team couldn't find a place for an Arsenal player either. Saka misses out to Mahrez and Bernardo Silva in our team, like one or the other, basically. With like Jonathan says, Foden and Sterling completing that.
So
front three.
You're playing Sterling as the centre forward, yeah, okay. No, that makes sense.
But even then, Aubameyang doesn't make it based on this season. So tough. Yeah, all Man City for WhoScored. So interesting to hear Jonathan agrees.
Yeah, and they've been doing this, Jonathan, having this incredible season, but without De Bruyne. I mean, he came on last night, which is worrying for the rest of the Premier League. Aguero, I don't think, scored a goal for over a year now. I mean, they've had some big players missing Laporte as well.
Yeah, they have. I mean, to an extent, I guess that shows their squad depth, but I think it also just shows how well Guardiola's managed the odd circumstances of this season. That, we touched on this with Klopp earlier, that if you look at Liverpool's pressures per game and the proportion of those in the final third, they are, for the last 3 seasons, they and City have been sort of neck and neck. They've been 1 and 2. This season, Liverpool are miles out in front. City have reigned at right back. I think they're 5th in the Premier League in terms of proportion of pressures in the final third, which is a sort of judging how intensely a team presses. I think is quite a difficult thing to do with stats, but that seems to me as good a measure as any. And I think that's one of the reasons Liverpool have. I mean, it's not one of the main reasons, but it is a contributory factor in Liverpool's struggles. They've adjusted less than other teams. Now, maybe they would have adjusted more had they had something closer to their putative first 11. I mean, City, obviously, Guardiola has loads of advantages given the players available to him, given the depth of squad. But equally, I think he's really proved himself as a coach who can think on his feet and can adapt this season.
Yeah, they're steamrolling, aren't they? They're absolutely going to win the title, probably at a canter as well. The closest team to them at one point was Manchester United, but they've completely fallen away, Martin. They're playing Newcastle this weekend, which I'm sure will be an easy 3 points. But have they bottled it a little bit?
Yeah. I think you have to say that they have. Maybe that there has been a question of the sort of character of the side over the last sort of few weeks that sort of, I don't know. I was never truly convinced that it was there. I was always sort of in the back of my mind that their defence is still ultimately going to prove a problem, and the protection to that defence in games against weaker sides when Solskjaer feels like he shouldn't play McTominay and Fred and Matic, or sort of 2 of the 3. It would be seen as defensive to play those players against sort of weaker sides. He does it obviously against the stronger teams. But with Pogba out of late as well, that's affected them for sure. I think you have to say they've bottled it because of, what was it, 4 or 5 weeks ago they were top of the league, and now they're nowhere compared to, they're well off the pace of Man City, and City have won every game, so it's going to be tough to sort of hold them at bay. But I think they've won 1 of the last 5 in the league now, and to draw against West Brom in the manner that they did last week was quite damning. So not only are they sort of not in the title, well, it's not a title race anymore, not in the title picture, they're suddenly looking over their shoulders again at sort of top 4. There's 4 points back. That's not a given in my opinion, because there's teams that Liverpool you'd expect to sort of pick up. Chelsea have already picked up. Leicester don't look like going away. So it's going to be tough, and I think that'll be a really, really intense fight until the end of the season. I think it'll be really tight.
Yeah, that when we get towards the end of the season and all that's been sorted, I think it's going to be really, really exciting. Exciting, not a word often used to describe when we're talking about Newcastle, Jonathan. And Callum Wilson's out for a relatively long time now as well. Are they at risk of getting sucked really into the relegation dogfight? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, if you look at the last 15 games, all competitions, they've won 2 and drawn 2 and lost 11. The one little glimmer of hope was when Wilson played really well at Everton. I think although San Maximan's back, he's not playing as well as he was before he had COVID. That I don't know. That's just a question of sort of getting back into the rhythm of it, or whether there has been sort of serious long-term effects there, because he's obviously out for a long time with that. Shaw and Manquillo are both out as well. For this game, Hendrick is still suspended. So I think they've got huge problems, because you can't really see where points are coming from. There's nothing about that side that says they're going to score goals, they're going to defend well enough to keep clean sheets. Almiron had that little flicker when it looked like he might be finding a bit of form, but I think he really needs something to play off. And they've got Andy Carroll, but 10 years ago that might have been an answer, but I'm not sure it is now. Just on United, I slightly disagree about them bottling. I just don't think they're ever any good. On the side, not never any good, just never that good. Even when they had that run of wins, they were always games where they were nicking it. They would get a penalty just when they needed one, or Pogba would score a brilliant goal just when they needed him to, or Bruno Fernandes would do something brilliant. I think the thing you saw against West Brom was when Pogba isn't there, sort of driving forward from that sort of slightly deeper midfield position, they're incredibly static. The only sort of movement came in that game, particularly in the first half, came from Harry Maguire stepping out, which he's perfectly decent at. But if you're Manchester United, Harry Maguire wandering forward can't be your way of breaking the lines. And Bruno Fernandes, although he scored a lovely goal in that game, I think he looks knackered. He just looks exhausted, because for a year, everything has been on him, and you just can't sustain that. I think Rashford's had a bit of a downturn recently, which again I suspect is just having to do too much. And even Cavani, I think, although he obviously started later than the others, he started to look a bit weary as well. So the individuals they rely on to get results have all sort of starting to look like the pressures, the wear and tear has been to tell on them.
Yeah, I think McTominay's been in the goals a little bit as well, hasn't he? But again, I'm not sure how sustainable that is.
I think he's a doubt as well, isn't he? Anyway, for the
Newcastle game. We'll finish with the long shot, but just before we go to that, Martin, no trivia.
No trivia? No, that's true. I didn't put it in the script. You can have one if you want. A very quick one.
Go on.
Only one current Everton player has scored more than one Merseyside derby goal. Who is it? Should we do the long shot and then?
Yeah, we'll do the long shot. We'll do the long shot and have a think about it. I mean, as the kids would say, all three of us on absolute flames last week with that long shot. Jonathan, you said West Brom would pick up something against Manchester United. They did. Martin, I've completely forgotten which game you pulled out. Which one was it? Was it Burnley at Crystal Palace?
Yeah, beat Crystal Palace.
I don't think you had 3-0, but not many would.
Yeah, happy with that. Matt Loughton on flames, like you say.
On flames, on fleek. And then I called Fulham to go to Everton and get the win as well. At last, after weeks of calling Fulham in the long shot, that they did it for me. So, I mean, we're doing good, aren't we? But then suddenly we have a good week, and then this week rolls around. And it's very difficult to choose from. I'm not even sure there is one. Have you guys got anything, Jonathan? I'll come to you.
Well,
first.
I was sort of blithe thinking, I'll pick Wolves to beat Leeds, and then it turns out that that's not a long shot. They're mildly favoured, so that's a bit of a blow. So now I'm struggling a bit. I might say West Brom to get something at Burnley. I assume Burnley must be favoured for that game.
I think so. We'll definitely allow that, I think.
Yeah. Absolute nightmare, because that is mine as well. That was mine. And I didn't have two this week. I usually have two, but like you say, there's nothing singing out to me. So I had West Brom as well, just based on their performance against Manchester United more than anything. I think Diagne was a real handful. Obviously, Burnley probably better equipped to deal with that than sort of Lindelof. But yeah, he was a handful. Yokushlu, Jonathan mentioned earlier, looked to sort of solidify them in the middle of the pitch. So it'll be it's not a game that I'll be sort of running to watch, but it is a game that West Brom have a good chance from. I think they're 3-1 to win, which is quite decent odds, I'd say. So yeah, I'll go for it. I'll put my neck on the line and say it. I'll go for a win. Not convinced.
I'm going big because there's no point doing it otherwise. I'm going to say Southampton are going to beat Chelsea. They're going to end their losing streak, and they're going to beat Chelsea with a Danny Ings inspired performance, much like Josh Maja at Everton last week.
If you want to back yourself and to bet on that, I was just going to look up the odds because I think that would be absolutely vast. Yeah, so Southampton are, well, 6-1.
Maybe if I get my 35 million payout, I might have a little flutter on that game. I think that does us for the Edge of the Box on Who Scored this week. Thanks ever so much for joining us and watching and listening to us. It's a real pleasure to do this podcast. Really.
Trivia right?
Oh, trivia! I've done it again. Get rid of me. Give me that payout. have you got it, Jonathan?
No, I haven't. Right, okay. It's got to be somebody who's been at the club for quite a while, and it's got to not be Calvert-Lewin. Otherwise, it's really.
I think I might have it.
So Seamus Coleman just on longevity and a vague sense he might have taken a penalty once. Michael Keane on the grounds that occasionally centre back score goals from corners, and Tom Davis just on the grounds that he's the sort of player who might score in a derby. I'm trying to read Martin's face.
I was trying to cover my face.
I think I've got it.
Is it one of those three that you think it is?
Yes.
Is it Michael Keane?
That was going to be my one. That was going to be my show.
Yeah, it is Michael Keane.
Come on! That was based entirely in your face, Martin.
Was it? Okay.
And if you want to have a poker night when all this is over, then I'm very much up for it.
I need to just leave the room.
Yeah, I remembered that Kane scored this season, so I was thinking he maybe scored from another set piece in previous years. He's been there a few years now, but well done, Jonathan. I mean, you'll catch him out one day, Martin, but I'm not sure when that day will be.
Enters a meta realm where I'm not actually answering the question. Yeah, I'm not actually finding the answer. I'm just finding clues within the question in Martin's face.
Get the producer to take you off the screen when we're doing the trivia from now on, and you can just reveal it. That'll do us. I'll try and do my outro again because keep forgetting the trivia at the end, although I will say it wasn't in the scripts and not entirely my fault. Thanks ever so much for listening to us and watching us this week. Real pleasure to do the podcast. Really enjoyed chatting to Jonathan and Martin, so hopefully you enjoy listening as well. If you're watching via YouTube, then make sure you're subscribing with your post notifications on and leave us a comment and a like as well. I think we'll be back next week, so yeah, watch out for us. See you later.